What's going on, guys? It's Jimmy here. So we've had now the second and the third largest bank failures ever in the history of the USA to happen here, all within like the last 2 weeks or so. So think about this here. And we've had multiple different banks fail. I think it's like 5 banks now have failed within the last couple days. And more potentially on the way, and a possible financial meltdown here, right? Now, remember here, the Fed, who's so worried about inflation, so worried, inflation. We got to raise interest rates on the American people, right? That's hurting the low and middle income American people so much, right? Let's raise interest rates. Let's double mortgage rates. It went from less than 3% to 7%. Let's raise credit card interest rates. Let's raise interest rates on everybody, right? Let's hurt the low and middle income people the most, right? Well, now that banks are in trouble, now the Fed has to inject as much as $2 trillion into the banking system to save its ass, for lack of a better word. Why? Because of these banks just taking on risky garbage and, so they can make money. So they're allowed to take on risk and do all sorts of shady, risky business practices, and they'll get backstopped by the Fed and the government. And they'll inject up to $2 trillion when everybody's worried about inflation. Fed's worried about inflation. So they'll get bailed out. But when the American people are hurting, think about what they've done here recently. They've cut the child tax credits. Those have been cut almost in half. The monthly payments are gone. SNAP benefits, those just got cut. So literally poor people who can't afford food, they literally just cut that. The pandemic emergency benefits just slashed. Millions and millions of Americans who literally can't afford food just got slashed. About 18 million people are going to get cut from Medicaid here now within the next few days. This is coming. In fact, the SNAP benefits are literally coming. It's hitting people's, we're not hitting people's bank accounts here within the next few days. Remember, that ended at the end of February. So people wouldn't be getting that money right here now and are not getting it now. We're talking about millions, tens of millions of people here. So it's hurting the lowest income people here in America the most. When those credit card interests that are now at the highest they have ever been, ever, in the history of America, remember the average credit card interest rate is at 20% or higher now. Who does that hurt the most? It hurts the low income, maybe middle low income. It surely doesn't hurt the wealthy. But when the wealthiest of everybody gets in trouble, the big banks, big business, what happens? The Fed jumps in and bails them out with $2 trillion. $2 trillion, not 2 million, not 2 billion, not 200 billion, but $2 trillion. Yeah, this is, good old Jerome Powell, who's concerned about, inflation and, raising those interest rates, making sure that, the cost of eggs and everything is, at the right price. So what has he done? Shovels out $2 trillion worth of money. I know you can't make this stuff up. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Well, I don't know, but here is Senator Elizabeth Warren with a mouthful for the Fed. Take a listen to what she has to say here.
Well, can we just start, though? Let's roll this back just a little bit about what went wrong. Remember, Gary Becker and the other CEOs of these multi-billion-dollar banks came to Washington back in 2016, said, lighten the regulations on us. Donald Trump ran for president saying, I will lighten the regulations on these big banks. He gets put in and he puts in bank regulators who lighten the regulations. He then goes to Congress and says to Congress, give them the authority to lighten the regulations even more. And Congress, with help from both parties, obliged him. Then Jerome Powell just took a flamethrower to the regulations, weakened dozens of the regulations. And then the CEOs of the banks did exactly what we expected. They loaded up on risk that boosted their short-term profits. They gave themselves huge bonuses and salaries and exploded their banks. So the problem we now face is twofold, as you described this. What are we going to do to make sure that the banks across this system are stable? That is, these big banks. The little community banks, they're doing great. But these banks that are multi-billion-dollar banks, how are we going to make sure that they are stable and that we've got a set of rules in place going forward that will keep them safe? So I want to see an independent investigation. Fed doesn't just get to investigate itself. I want to see us make a change in the laws, roll back the rollbacks to put tougher regulations in place. And we finally need to step in and say, these bank CEOs, we've got to align them so that there are clawbacks, they're giving up on these big salaries, and they don't get to go into banking again if they explode a bank. So that's how I see the overall system right now.
Okay, but what about in the moment? How concerned are you about this?
In the moment.
About this unraveling on us in the next couple of weeks?
Well, in the moment, we've got the federal government obviously taking extraordinary action. They've done it to back up depositors. And I think it's fair to say that depositors should be able to take a pretty deep breath about the federal government has indicated there's going to be a lot of protection for you. But we have to worry about how much risk is in these multi-billion-dollar banks because it's perfectly clear that these regulators were asleep at the switch.
And I want to get to that. I mean, because, there's some Republican lawmakers that are arguing, look, that the 2018 law itself didn't tell the Fed not to regulate these banks. That essentially, if they wanted to be on top of them, they still could. Where do you fall on that? Is this more on the Fed or more on the law that was repealed?
It's both and. Because what the law specifically said is, here's some regulations you got to roll back. But mostly the door is wide open to roll back those regulations. And do you know how I know that is exactly what the effect of the law was? Because Jerome Powell said so. He stood up after the law was passed and he said, whoa, that he was going to weaken a whole slate of regulations. And why? It's in the same sentence. Because Congress just told me to. Right. So there's plenty of working together to weaken regulations. And look, that's why now what we need to do is we need to go back and take that provision that we passed in 2018 and just roll it back out and say, no, the Fed doesn't get that ability to just go to sleep when they have ultimate supervisory responsibilities over these multi-billion-dollar banks.
Last fall, you had written a letter to Fed Chair Jay Powell, you and a lot of other lawmakers concerned about the rapid rise of interest rates. At the time, you didn't mention the impact on potentially on banking investments, and perhaps there's no reason you should have at the time. You were more concerned about his intended goal of raising the rates. Considering another rate hike is on the table, do you think it would send a bad message to the economy that maybe our banks are unstable if he doesn't keep on this path? Or do you think he should keep going if that is his intent and raise a quarter point?
No, I do not think he should raise rates. But look, I want full disclosure here. I've been in the camp for a long time that these extraordinary rate increases that he has taken on, these extreme rate increases, are something that he should not be doing.
Why?
And the reason for that is twofold.
Yeah.
Well, twofold. The first is to remind Chair Powell he has a dual mandate. Yes, he is responsible for dealing with inflation, but he is also responsible for employment. And what Chair Powell is trying to do, and he has said fairly explicitly, is that they are trying to, in effect, slow down the economy so that, this is by the Fed's own estimate, 2 million people will lose their jobs. And I believe that is not what the chair of the Federal Reserve should be doing. I want to make a second point on inflation as well, though. There are other drivers of the cost increase. For example, price gouging, supply chain kinks, the war in Ukraine. Raising interest rates doesn't do anything to solve those problems. All it does, at least by the way the chair wants to do this, is put millions of people out of work. I opposed Chair Powell for his initial nomination, but his renomination, I opposed him because of his views on regulation and what he was already doing to weaken regulation. But I think he's failing in both jobs, both as the oversight manager of these big banks, which is his job, and also what he's doing with inflation.
If at this point, I am curious, do you think, it sounds like we are never going to let a bank fail. Is that a mistake? Is it okay for banks to fail?
You know, I always want to start in this area with the resentment that our community banks feel. The regulators for years have let them fail.
Right.
And they really have to bear the consequences if their balance sheets are not solid. Now, fortunately, right now, their balance sheets are very solid. They know their business, and they're in a secure place. But these multi-billion-dollar banks, I think the thing that just downright offends me is that Gary Becker and these other CEOs were coming to Washington telling Donald Trump, telling the Republicans, telling Congress they pose no risk. They should be treated just like those small community banks that know their communities and don't take on much risk. And look, these are guys who figured out they could make a lot of money by loading up on risk. Look at just the piece on inflation. They made the bet that inflation would stay at historic lows forever. Now, why? Not because they're not smart. They made that bet because it cost money to hedge that bet. And that would have bitten into profits. And that would have bitten into the bonuses they got. So that means, this is why I have to underscore this, for these big banks that could take down the banking system, that could take down a lot of small businesses and medium-sized businesses, we've got to have tough regulators. That means, and I'm going to say it again, we've got to have an independent investigation. Powell needs to turn around the regulations that are in place right now. Congress needs to step up and roll back the changes that were made in 2018, and we need to hold these CEOs accountable. That's how we have a safe and secure banking system.
It's pretty clear you don't have confidence in Jay Powell. Do you think the president should fire him?
Look, my views on Jay Powell are well known at this point. He has had two jobs. One is to deal with monetary policy. One is to deal with regulation. He has failed at both.
Right. Would you advise President Biden to replace him?
Look, I don't think he should be chairman of the Federal Reserve. I have said it as publicly as I know how to say it. I've said it to everyone.
So let me know your thoughts. Do you think Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell should be fired? And do you think they should keep raising interest rates to bring down inflation? I personally think that all the inflation that comes down based on what will come down from raising inflation has already done so. Anything that's interest rate sensitive, for example, the housing market, cars, anything that's interest rate sensitive has already come down price-wise. For example, when they raise interest rates, is the price of eggs going to come down? No. Is the price of your electricity going to come down? No. Is your landlord going to lower your rent this week or this month because of interest rates? You can ask him. Is the price of food going to come down? We have not seen the price of food come down, even though they've raised interest rates almost at a historic rapid pace. So the thing is that there's certain things. The price of butter is not going to come down no matter how much they raise interest rates. One might argue that those type of things could go up if they keep raising interest rates because people have to charge stuff on their credit cards, and it's actually going to cost them more if they can't afford things. So this is the thing, is that they've already raised interest rates dramatically. So many, I think it's 8 times now in the course of, it's like a year, a little bit over a year, something like that. So are they going to keep raising interest rates? And if so, how many more and for how long? Well, I'll keep you up to date here. So make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel and click the bell icon. If you appreciate these videos, don't forget to hit the like button for us as well. And stay tuned. Remember, new videos come out here every day at 10 a.m., 3 p.m., and 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Here's some videos you should watch next. Here's some big news for Social Security and Medicare in this video. And most people have no idea about this virus detail that was just uncovered. So click on one of those videos next. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next video.